Maybe we can start with the afternoon and last of the sessions of the workshop MACH 2021, and many thanks to Professor Rizzi for being here.
Good afternoon, everybody. So let's start the last session of this conference. Last but not least, our first speaker is Filippo Riva, and the title of his talk is on a rate-independent damage model for hybrid laminates with cohesive interface. So the stage is yours for 5 minutes. We're going to have questions.
Thank you, Matteo, for the nice introduction. Yeah, okay. Yes, okay, it works. And also thanks to the organizers for the kind invitation and for the opportunity of being here. So today I'm going to talk about a recent work in collaboration with Elena Bonetti, who was here yesterday and who does not need any presentation, Cecilia Calaterra, which is one of the organizers, and Francesco Fretti from the University of Pavia. This work is about, as you can see in the title, a rate-independent damage model for hybrid laminates with a cohesive interface. It's not so close with the cultural heritage, but however, it's let's say mechanical model, mechanical damage model, which could be interesting for this in this kind of research and talk. Okay, so okay, it was working before, but now okay.
I know.
No. Okay. So the model we consider describes the evolution of two one-dimensional bars which are glued together, and these two bars are sticked on the wall on the left-hand side, and they are loaded by a horizontal loading called the W. And yeah, the number 2, it's only for simplicity. You can imagine a material made of several layers. But yeah, in the talk, I will confine myself to two bars. And these bars undergo a damage. And more importantly is that this glue follows a cohesive law. Cohesive means that the degradation process of this glue is gradual, and it does not. This process does not happen instantaneously. We also assume that the loading, namely the shape boundary condition, the hard device, is assumed to be slow, so that all the inertial effects can be neglected, and the evolution is quasi-static or rate-independent. We already saw this name in Ricarda's talk yesterday. So this picture, there is this simple model. We have the two bars. Between them, we have the cohesive glue. The two bars are fixed to a wall on the left-hand side, and they are put by this loading on the other endpoint. Here, you can see also one thing. This picture may be a bit misleading because in the picture you can see two bidimensional bars, but I stress that the model is purely one-dimensional. Namely, the scalar variable x is simply the length of the bar from 0 to some capital N, let's say. And okay, here you can see the variables involved in this model. U1 and U2 are the horizontal displacements of the bars, while alpha 1 and alpha 2 are the damage variables, the phase field variable, which models the damage which these bars can have. On the cohesive interface, we have also these two variables, which are not which depends explicitly on the displacements. They have the slip of the two displacements, delta, the absolute value of the difference between them, and an history variable, which records the maximal slip which is reached till a certain time t. These are called delta and delta H. Okay, here there's some more information about that. As I said before, U1 and U2 are the horizontal displacement of the bars. With the bold lecter, we denote the vector with components U1 and U2. Then, yes, delta is the slip of the two displacements on the interface. Delta H is the history variable, which is important to describe cohesive loads. And then finally, alpha 1 and alpha 2 are the damage variables. We assume they are not decreasing in time, because for us, damage is an irreversible process. The material cannot heal itself. And they are valued in the interval 0, 1. For us, 0 means completely sound material, while 1 means completely broken, completely damaged. Okay, to describe the evolution of this model, we decided to adopt a variational notion of solution called energetic evolution. Riccarda spoke about that also yesterday. This concept has been introduced by the works of Alexander Milke, Thomas Lubitsch, and Florian Thail, something like 20 or 30 years ago. And in order to be able to give this definition, we need to present the energies involved in this mechanical model. Okay, so the first energy involved is the elastic energy of the two bars. So here we have the sum, because we are summing the two contributes of the two bars. And this is the elastic energy of the bars, is the simplest possible elastic energy. It is an integral of the reference configuration of an elastic modulus times the gradient squared. Here we are in one dimension, so it's a simple derivative. And the elastic modulus here is assumed to be a function of the damage. We assume that it is a continuous function, increasing because let's say that the more the material is damaged and the less elastic energy it possesses. We also assume this technical the assumption that the minimum of this function is positive. This means that we are restricting ourselves to the so-called incomplete damage set, namely that even if the damage variable reaches the value 1, so the maximum value, still the material possesses a small elastic yield. Okay, and I want to stress that the real problem with the complete damage case, when this minimum is actually 0, is much more difficult to treat from a mathematical point of view due to the loss of cohesiveness for mathematicians of the functional. However, this is a work in progress. Okay, this was the first energy. The second one is the energy stored and dissipated by the damage variable during this process. Also here we have the sum, because we have the two bars. The first linear term represents the stored energy during the damage process. The second one is the stored energy of the damage variable. This is a classical. Is there a square? No, here no, you can add also alpha square in order to have something like Ambrosio Torelli or something like that. Yeah, in the work you can have let's say a function of alpha, which is something. It has only to be non-negative, so you can think you can add different behaviors of this energy. Here, for simplicity, I only choose this one, which is the dissipating energy. Yeah, okay, we have the two, and the more important energy for us, for this model, is the cohesive energy of the integrals. So it is an integral over, again, 0, 0, capital L, of a suitable density called phi, which depends both on the slip and on the history slip. This function phi, which depends on two variables y and z, is called the loading and unloading density. And for the first part of the talk, we'll satisfy very general assumption. That to be only lower semi-continuous, bounded, and continuous in the second variable, let's say. But you have to keep in mind a very specific form for this kind of density coming from experiments from application, which is this one. Okay, to describe it, on the horizontal axis, we have both variables, so y and z. And on the diagonal, namely when y is equal to z, the function phi, and we call c of z the function phi on the diagonal, is a concave and increasing function, and with the bounded, so we have an asymptote, and this asymptote is the toughness, is called, represent the toughness of the glue. Yesterday in the talk of Matteo, he presented a brittle fracture. In the brittle fracture, there is this density, but this density is simply constant to the is a constant equal to the fracture toughness. But in quasi flows, we have this concave behavior during the loading regime and some convex behavior in the unloading. To be more precise, let's imagine that we start with this loading procedural bar, and for till a certain time, we are the loading is increasing, so the slip itself is increasing. If the slip is increasing, if the slip delta is increasing, delta coincides with delta H, and so we are following. We are following this concave path, so the energy is dissipates during this procedure. And if at a certain point, let's say Z1, we start with an unloading phase, we come back but following the convex path. So we are somehow recovering some part of the energy, but in the end, when the slip is zero, we have not recovered the wall energy because we are here and over in the origin. And then so on and so forth. The procedure keeps going in this way. Okay, so this is the behavior of this cohesive load. Okay, now that yes, okay, this is the explicit form of the previous function. So for the loading behavior, namely the function c, so p of the diagonal, you can take a negative exponential, and while the unloading regime, namely the dependence on y, can be simply quadratic. So you take a parabola, and then the coefficients are built in such a way that here we have a C1 connection between the two. We have C1 connection here and in no points. Okay, perfect. So now we have all the ingredients to give the definition of this notion of solution, which I recall is an energetic solution. So given suitable initial data and the loading term, we say that the pair of displacement and energy is an energetic evolution if this final assumption of conditional field. The first one, called compatibility, simply says that for every time t, our displacement are in the energy space, namely the energy is finite at every time. Then, of course, we have the initial data unachieved. Then we have irreversibility. The damage variable for us is non-decreasing in time. And then there are these two main conditions, global stability and the energy balance. So the global stability is saying that for every time our state, namely the pair displacement damage, is a global minimum of the total energy. So the sum of elastic energy of the damage and quasi energy. So at time t, we are at the global minimum of the energy. And to get to this, we satisfy an energy balance. So the energy, the total energy of time t has to be equal to the initial total energy plus the work of the external loading, which this particular model can be written as here as this expression, but it's not very important. Okay, so what we wanted to do is to prove existence, so give a mathematical validation for this kind of model. Okay, I have to say that unfortunately, for the moment, we need to introduce a weaker notion of solution due to some problem related to the history variable, delta H, namely the history slip. And this weaker notion is very similar to the previous one. We only add an additional variable called gamma, which replaces the history variable delta H. And the advantage of adding this variable is that we split the dependence, we split the relation between delta H and U. Because I recall you that the previous definition, the only unknown were the displacement of the damage, and the delta and delta H, so the slip and the history slip, depends explicitly on U. While here we add this new variable, and so it's easier to find this kind of solution. And the definition is similar to the previous one, and in red you can see the differences, which are related to this gamma. It has to be a continuous function in space. It has to be non-decreasing in time because it has to be an irreversible process. This gamma has to replace the history variable. And in the global stability and the energy balance, it has to replace the real history variable. Okay, so the first result we were able to achieve was the existence of this weaker notion of evolution. So we were able to prove existence for this generalized energetic evolution U alpha gamma. So the strategy of the proof we followed is quite standard for this kind of problems. We used a time discretization plus a minimizing movement scheme. This is for mathematicians. And thanks to this algorithm, we were able to find some uniform bounds, extract suitable convergent subsequences, and then we were able to prove that this limit was actually a generalized energetic limit. Okay, so I'll be quick in the following slide, since this for mathematicians is quite standard, and for non-mathematicians it's not very interesting. However, I want to explain this algorithm because for numerics could be interesting. So we discretize the time interval 0 capital T by a sequence of partition, and for every k to equal to 1 n, we perform this implicit Euler schema. So given uk minus 1, given uk minus 1, alpha k minus 1, and delta H k minus 1, we select uk and alpha k as a global minimum of the total energy. And then we update delta H k by taking the maximum between the previous one and the actual slip, so the difference between 1k and this is done to preserve the reversibility of the history slip. And okay, this was the algorithm we performed. Then one here has only a bunch of points. One needs to build some interpolants at these points. We choose piecewise constant interpolants. That was enough. Then we were able to prove some uniform bound, let's say, starting from this algorithm and thanks to some compactness property. And thanks to the bounds, we were able to prove convergence in some sense to all the variables. So the displacement converges weakly in H1, the damage is the same, and finally the history slip converges in a certain way to a function gamma, which a priori, since this is a compactness argument, a priori it's not related at all with the limit function u one obtained in the first step. So that's why it's easier to introduce this weaker notion of solution. And okay, however, one can prove always an inequality. So this limit function gamma is always greater or equal than the proper history slip. And in general, one would think that equality is always true. And that's something we are not sure about. But in some cases, we were able to prove equality. And this is the, let's say, the second part of our result. Yeah, I skipped this last slide. Let's say that it can be proved that this limit function, when obtained this way, is actually generalized energetic evolution. This follows, now I'm speaking only to mathematicians, unfortunately. Let's say by local semi-continuity of the energy together with the fact that this algorithm selected global minima of the total energy. Okay, so the point is that having a weaker notion of solutions, okay, for a mathematician could be great, but actually in applications it's not something that one wants to have. The point is that our approach is not new. It's something that has been already used in also in more complicated problems like cohesive fractures. So we are in one dimension. I said again, well, fracture problems are vectorial problems. So they are more complicated. However, for that complicated problem, the existence of weak notion of solution was, let's say that they were satisfied to have also obtained such a weak result. However, in this simple problem, we weren't that satisfied. And so we wanted to understand in which cases we could really obtain the equality between this fictitious variable gamma and the proper history slip delta H, in order to recover a real, let's say, a genuine energetic evolution in which the only variables are displacement and energy. So, okay, we were able to do this under some stronger assumption on, let's focus only on the loading and loading density field. Remember the picture I presented you at the beginning. So we have concave loading and convex quadratic, we would say. And indeed, the assumptions that we needed to fulfill, to complete the argument, are these five. And I want only to comment the first two. So the first one is lambda convexity assumption. What does lambda convexity mean? Let's say that C, which was the concave and increasing path, so the loading on the diagonal, was concave. But if we add to it a parabola times this times a certain parameter lambda, then it becomes convex. This is lambda convexity. And every regular function is actually lambda convex for some suitable lambda, for some great lambda. So this is not a restrictive assumption. And the second assumption is that in the first variable, so y, it has to be non-decreasing and convex. But in our example, it was quadratic. So this is fulfilled. Then there are other three technical assumptions that I don't want to comment, but I want only to say that the previous explicit example fulfills all these 5 conditions. So, in a let's say mechanically meaningful context, which is the example I gave you before, we fulfill this assumption, so we are able to improve the result. And the final result is summarized in this slide. So, under the previous assumptions, the stronger assumption of the previous slide, we are able to prove that given a generalized energetic evolution, which we know that it exists from the previous discussion, under some relationship between the parameters, actually we can gain some regularity time for both the displacement and the damage. We prove that here there are some complicated space. Let's say that they are continuous in time and continuous in space somehow. And also the history slip is continuous both in time and space. So we under the previous assumption we are in a setting in which the evolution evolves without jumps. Okay. So after this regularity result, we are able to prove that thanks to the continuity, we're able to prove that actually the fictitious variable gamma coincides with the proper one. And so as a final corollary, we get the real existence of a genuine energetic evolution for this mechanical problem. Okay, I think that my time is over, so I skip all the technical parts which I didn't want to say because they are boring, and I thank you for your attention.
So thank you, Filippo, for the talk. Let's open it for discussion. We have questions here from the audience or from the audience online. Comments?
Thank you. Only a curiosity about how many is generally is one-dimensional. What is really one-dimensional? What is possible to extend to two-dimensional? I don't know. So,
yeah, actually, let's say the mechanical problem we started with was also bidimensional. The point was that the presence of this cohesive energy was hard to deal with, so we preferred to simplify the problem, to simplify all the other stuff and start with one-dimensional. Yeah, I think that it can be generalized with some work, not so trivially, but it's possible. The point is that instead of having scalar functions, of course you have to work with vectorial functions, and so with vectorial function, the main problems are related to some infinity bounds or something like that. Yeah, it's something that can be done for sure. Not so trivially, but yes.
because, for example, in displacement, remains perceived. I think it's possible to assume. So there is something which is lower there.
Which is?
Also for
Yes, of course. Yeah, the energy is simply gradient square, value of perceivedness, and each one is the same. The point is that for the I didn't be precise, but at a certain point we used the embedding of H1 into an order space, and this only holds in one dimension. That was the part for the history slip. So if we consider higher dimension, one has to work a bit in that point. But yeah, all the machinery work is not one-dimensional. There are only some details to be clarified. All of that.
Okay. Any more questions or comments? Anyone online? No? If not, thank you again. Share the new presentation. Okay, so our second speaker this afternoon is Alessandro Rizzi from Milan, right?
Yep.
And the title of his talk is a physical chemical model for color decay as input to a perceptual approach for the restoration of faded films. So, stage is yours.
Thank you.
5 minutes.
Did you hear my voice?
No.
Okay. So, very long title. I'm going to present you some issues related to movie restoration. And the main idea, and thank you for allowing me to be here, the main idea is creating contact with you. So you will see, hopefully this is orange, you will see an orange frame to indicate that that's probably, for us, is a problem of that in some way is regarded to mathematical issues, and maybe it could be of interest for you. And so let's talk about that. The main idea is that movies fade, they melt, we are going to lose them over the time. Slowly, just to give you an idea of how quick is the decay of kind of standard film. According to the humidity in which it's stored and temperature in which it's stored. For instance, here we are about 20 degrees, maybe a little bit more, probably a bit humid. So we end up in this zone. That means that around 20 years after the film is done and is stored, start the decay. And decay is non-reversible, and once it starts, it's gone. It's not for it can only get worse. So the idea is to try to restore. Of course, for the scientists and for restoration, we mean digital restoration. And from a colorimetric point of view, it seems kind of easy solution in the sense that you get some information about the color of the original color, and then you apply the original color. Once I spoke with there was a movie about the Tevere River here in Rome, and someone say, "Oh, that's easy. You need to ask which color was the Tevere in the 50s." What? No, impossible. You never had the metric information that you need to restore the movie, and so the standard straight colorimetric solution is not something that we can really do. And so maybe can be of help this idea of having a model of decay. So films are made by pigments and colorants, and we can characterize them from a chemical point of view, and then we can try to see how the decay goes. And here is a very mathematical issue, because the model of decay is very important for us. But once we have the model of decay, again, it's not enough, because there's a non-linear semi-enclosed problem, because you have a decay that's gone, but also you have information that is carried by the pigment, and so you never know how much is the original information comes to pigment and how strong has been the decay. Then we have also a problem of gamma differences. We come back to gammas right after. So, pipeline of the digital restoration, very simplified. We digitize the movie, we restore the movie, and then we screen the movie. So, some issue, digitization. Digitization is probably the stage, the steps in which we feel more comfortable, because, okay, we just push the button and we put our origin in some sort of scanner, and then this is done. Unfortunately, it's not, because not all the system, a major part of the system use a lens, like cameras and movies. And since they use a lens, they have a problem that is called a glare. That means that there's the ray of light travels the lens, but there's a teeny fraction, 2, 3, 4%, depends, of the light energy that scatters. And that means it distributes all around. So we have, for instance, 2 points, but once they scatter, those 2 points are no more points, so they spread. The problem is that every single pixel has a figure of glare, and so every single pixel disturbs the other pixel, and that means that even if the error, the dispersion is teeny tiny, we are talking about millions of small quantity that becomes a big number. And so here it's very important. We talk a little bit during lunch and dinner, but the convolution strategy would be wonderful. So let's talk about that. But just to give you an example that is related to this lunch talk, we took, this is a color checker, so very simple standard color checker. We hang it on the wall, and because we want something that does not change any possible value in the illumination. So this was fixed on the wall. Then we moved the camera. And so the point is that we frame, in this case, the black patch was surrounded by a lot of white from the wall. In this case, less, in this case, almost nothing. Just this difference, we're talking about seeing, so of course it's the same color checker, but just moving the camera end up with 50% difference in the black. So we're talking about a tremendous amount of differences between reality and the picture of reality. And this case was even crazier in the sense that we framed the color checker that was hanging up on the window in our lab. And of course, we did not frame the light outside, but just because of the stray light coming in, we end up with more than 250% error in the black. We're talking just about black and white, not mentioning color that so digitization is not, let's not give it for granted. Let's talk about that and keep on measuring things before and after. Then screening. I leave the central part for the last topic. Screening is we're supposed to restore the movie and then screen the movie, but of course we can also screen a very modern actual movie. We go in, hopefully, due to these changes in the cinema market. But now there's a lot of new things like white gamuts, HDR, but every projector, like every camera, has a lot of hidden computation. So the producer will never tell you about what starts in the beginning, what arrives on the screen. There are two different things. What they do, basically, there are many things, but what they do, major part of the case is to have a beautiful image, is color enhancement. So we have super saturated color that are beautiful, and micro contrast. That is this sensation of sharpness, super sharpness, I would like to say, that we have when we watch a 4K movie on Netflix or when we go. But this is not real, and is the way, for instance, we distinguish a movie shot on film from the 50s, and you see in seconds, say, oh, this is film. Because films do not have micro contrast. But micro contrast is like a sodium, so that's everything tastes like the same taste, because you keep to add the same kind of flavor. This can be a problem. But then we have the gamut issue, because in the pipeline of movie restoration, I spoiled my joke. We start from this, then we have the gamut of the scanner, of course, the gamut of the original material. Every film, original films, has a gamut. For non-technical gamut is the amount of color that you can reproduce on a device. And then you have a scanner that has a gamut as well. Then, of course, you want to do editing, things like that. and you have a gamut of the piece you work on, and finally you screen it or you watch it, you have another gamut. So that was so there's a gamut of throws. So there's a fight there, and of course gamuts can be a problem. But the major part of the gamuts are known when we talk about restoration, because now it's easy. You have a display, you can ask manufacturer, or you can measure yourself display. But what about an alpha from the 30s? For that, we set up a database, an online database, public database, so if you have any kind of possible information that relates to films, from a technical point of view, but also from the publicity of the films, every kind of material, historical material that relates to photographic and cinema films, please share with us. And then going back to the gamut, when you process the gamut, so when you move your color to another set of colors, like basically it's like when you do a movie at your home. So you start from a home, you go and end up with a lot of fatigue in your new home, and you have to set up all the furniture. So you can imagine the problem. So it may be some little drawers that not fit, do not have space for it. So you have to eliminate some furniture. But mainly, from a color science point of view, you have to choose a strategy. So you have to set up an intent, and then there's a serious problem of error propagation. We have a problem of error propagation also in the glare problem when you acquire an image. This idea of glare propagates, and we would like to have it a little bit of control, but we do not have it. And then another point is that in choosing the way you map the color, you can be colorimetrically precise or perceptually precise, or many other variants in between. It can be global, it can be local, but just to make it simple. So it's a kind of fight between colorimetry, so being precise in point that can have some sense in some teeny tiny application, or preserve the appearance. And we have in mind this idea of the color of the Technicolor, going with the wind, for instance, or many other things. That's, if you see it home on your TV set, they have a flavor. But if you go in the screening, you have you're lucky enough to have the real screening from the film. Color are completely different. So Technicolor, the color of the Technicolor had a flavor that is not yet imitated or imitable by actual technology. But in this colorimetry versus appearance regards many points, many issues of colorimetry. And for instance, one is we were talking about CLAB as a kind of perceptual space, but does not exist a color difference that everybody agree on. And some researcher suggest that probably the color differences does not work because the space is not the correct space. And so maybe you want to describe the color not in a simple geometrical Euclidean space, but in some other spaces that has some more properties that can get closer to our perception. Then here we are to the restoration point, and the restoration means that restoration is a big issue because not a restoration expert, but when you have something that is no more like used to be, and you want to improve it, clean it, and so on. Talking about movies, should we eliminate the jitter of the original movie? Should we eliminate the dust, the scratches? And it's a big debate. I don't want to step into this debate, but we move on a line that is the original material as it is. In some cases, Cinematech has this very simplistic approach. They say, okay, I don't want to touch. I put in the fridge. I digitize it, put in the fridge. That's it. And this is the minimal approach. Then, on the other hand, I want to make it, wow, CinemaScope, Dolby, THX, perfect. So, and of course, as it has a sense, I don't know.
But in between those 2 points, there's a huge amount of possible points in which you can stop. But in every single step, the leading idea is that you have this leading approach in saving the original content and the original support. But this, in many cases, cannot be possible. And so the approach we want to propose is that comes from Gombrich and says, you don't have to save it as a material things. Talking about movie, of course, just movie. You should make the experience. You should, at the end, save the ratios of what you are screening, because it's more or less like the fact that you, when you go and want to choose a TV set, so you go to the supermarket, you want to buy a TV set, and you have this huge wall of TV sets, and they all look different. And then you choose one, and you go home, and you're happy, and full stop. Because it's not the sensation, the feeling you have in watching a movie depends on how your vision system interact with the environment. And if you have the only TV set in the room, you will adjust the color. And don't use the word adaptation.
It's not absolute color as an absolute, yeah.
Absolutely, yes, correct.
Because the layer is absolute, yeah.
Completely different story, yeah. And so basically, the idea is that, okay, if we have this very robust thing that is our vision system, how can we put this into play? So the idea is having, let's start to restore movies with a model of human vision. And of course, modeling human vision is extremely complex things. We know 20-25% of actual vision system. But there's a bunch, a family of algorithms that we call spatial color algorithms that basically has the property of going around the image and collecting information in order to recompute the pixel and make it closer to the appearance. That is basically, you have this color, and this color gives you a certain sensation. Then you change the context, and the sensation of color will change. So that is, you want to, for every pixel, because every pixel is supposed to change in some way, and you want to go and recompute and substituting the actual parametric information with the information about color appearance. That is basically dividing the physical aspect of the formation of color. That is the easy part, because we have a radiance and reflectance. But then when you enter your visual system, that's transforming a sensation. Okay, so just to present you some characteristics, I don't have enough time to present the whole family of SCA, but just this basic idea is that there's an experiment from the 60s by Milan that is the founder of Colloidal. And so what he did is that he put these two gray patches, and you can imagine this is a flat, of course, this is a reproduction, it's not a real situation, but imagine a flat black and white monitor like this, and then you put the light closer to the bottom. So that means that this has a lower reflectance by higher luminance. And this has a higher reflectance, a lower luminance. The result is that since the luminance, that is the light coming to you, is the luminance times reflectance, they have the same lights coming from the point to your eyes. That means that if you take a picture with a camera, they will be the same ray. But if you look at them, they will be different. And so how to have a computational model of this? And so the original idea by this school ratings, this algorithm, is that they go around to keep computing ratios between patches. And basically, if you keep computing ratio, then you end up that your sensation between 2 points is the ratio between 2 points. That's very simple, but it can happen if you apply this. It means that according to the point you start, the point you end, the things can change. And so keep this sequential product, but to give a meaning of this kind of search, it's like you're going around searching for the reference white. That means that every time you encounter an area that is lighter than the area you have traveled from, you overtake the unity, then you reset. And so this is the highly nonlinear. We will go back to this when we talk about PDE. But this nonlinear fact that in your computation you reset to 1 means that every time you look to find something lighter, this is your new reference. And then you do a lot of path around your image, then you make the average. But in doing this, basically you have a kind of statistical search of your image. And in this statistical search, you found sometimes some whites and otherwise. And so you end up with a kind of behavior that is very similar to what we do in the system. But since we want to search for the local reference Y, a key point is how we do this search. And just to give you some idea, if you do, this is a very old implementation of ratings, but if you have a standard fixed search that is this kind of spiral, you end up with ghost images. And so the search influences the result. And so we many attempted Brownian paths that in some way were close to the cortical receptor distribution in our brain. Then there's also this work by Filippo about how to implement cerebral motion. That is a medical issue very interesting. But this is the point. The point you don't want to explore the image, because if you imagine you have a path, then you go around very few. You don't have very much sample, so that's ends in having a very high noise. But you want to increment your search, so on and so on. But you do not want to increment much your search, because if you increment too much your search, you end up with a global behavior. And this is not what vision does. So it's a very delicate trade-off, because going around searching the reference, but not too much. And other example of path, we did also a swirl, agent swirl. So the idea of termites comes from ant colonies. And so you have this computation that goes around, and the ant colony have this idea of leaving the pheromone, which keep the trace of. And if you find a piece of sugar, you are communicating to your bodies that sugar is there. We did the opposite. We leave a kind of poison on pheromone, in which you travel this pixel. Okay, you already been there, so let's be somewhere else in order to explore the more with a closer amount of path response. Then another idea was that if you going around and then you reset, if your goal is just leaving down your values at the end of this path, that means that the reset is like starting from the point. So everything I traveled before is lost. And so it is that, okay, so let's do that. Instead of going around, I just shot like like a kind of shooting of teeny tiny bullets, and then I, instead of analyzing the whole image, I have the statistical sampling. Then I take the value of every point, and I find the lightest one, that's became my reference one. And this it works quite well. Of course, here instead of the way to search locality, you have the way to sample your image. And so it's just changing the problem, not the problem. I will show you some results. But then there's also, this can be formalized with PDE. I hope we can find it interesting. There's a lot of work on PDE, but the major part of this implementation fails in implementing the reset. So if you are interested, I'm very happy to discuss this, because what would be the best is to having a PDE that in some way keep the reset feature. That is very important for it. Again, just to show you some results, this is not retrix, is a archive that is very close. Normal test by Maxophos before and after. Of course, the final result in this case is not so beautiful, but the point is that this configuration is totally non-supervised. So you just push the button. And same movie, just to let you have a hint of the chromatic diversity before and after the configuration. Then you can do that also back in my image. What you end up in equalizing, restoring the context of the region. This is a lot to do with HDR, so that can be further discussed. But interesting point is that if your original, that is the right part, is not so bad, this argument doesn't touch very much. So the good one is that you can process the image without the risk to get the image destroyed. Last point that I want to introduce is the title. So what if we use in the middle this decay model? So get on the process, but before processing with these algorithms, we apply the model of decay. And there's some, sorry, because of this is glare. Yes, reading. So this is the original. This is the original restored with the decay model, and this is decay model plus process. So what you see is that this is a very good model from Rudolf Schmidt. Basically, the model was able to restore, to eliminate the main part of the forecast, but lacks of contrast. So this idea of giving the final touch in this case was quite right. Another example, same approach, original dynamic model, then dynamic model, and then dynamic model plus SU. In this case, last example, original model of decay, and two possible applications of two different SU. That's just to leave that is not the final solution. It's something that needs to a lot of research, also in terms of judging the final quality. This is another chapter that I'll talk about when you want. But that, of course, should be also connected to the model. If you have a PDE, for instance, process the frame, which one is the good one? Very, very difficult answer. So special effects. Thank you.
So thank you, Alessandro, for this inspiring talk. And let's open it to discussion.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions, but it's late. So one question is the following. A movie move. So how is possible to recover some information, not only in the frame, but in the frame in the neighbor? Because I think, okay, if you are in a soap opera, there is no more movement, for example. I don't know, but yes, for a recent movie, there is a lot of actions, okay, but for, I think, I don't know, for all movie, I think there is not some action, so it's possible to recover information also for previous frame, next frame, for the same.
No, that's a great question. The good and the bad. The good is that you can see the movie as a 3D frame. So you have a real 3D model that is X, Y, and time. And we thought about implementing 3D. We haven't done so, but it should be great. First of all, you have the same bunch of information because you need to divide shots. because of course, if you have shots in this direction, then they change completely. This can cause problem. But if you do the process within shot, that's perfect. So I expect good results. So great question. But the things to take care of is that if you go and analyze how is the frame in live action, you find that if I move an object, our vision system needs to have a fluffy, blurred transition. And that's interesting because if you do, have you seen the movie 28 Days, the zombie movie that was done 20 years ago, 20 years. That was one of the first digital shots movie, and that is perfect for a zombie, but this idea of having a picture very clean, very sharp, and every frame 25 per second, the result is a kind of struggle effect. So you want to recover the color information, but you want to over-enhance the contrast because this ends up in kind of struggle effect. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I mean, it's not image restoration, it's not really my field, but I do recall seminars that were trying to enhance image quality from the single frames of a movie, say, of a bookshelf. And the fact that different frames have somehow sub-pixel distance between each other, they were actually able to gain an incredible amount of information by comparing them and actually enhance the resolution. So maybe similar techniques could be useful for you to get some of the information.
My guess is
and then you don't want to use all of it, you said.
No, sure. But my guess is a good example. My guess is that our vision does that. So we have this idea of processing what is missing, not what we have. Yeah.
So do I understand that you are trying to not only to reconstruct the picture, but also the way we see?
Yeah.
That's why you're thinking about this person. What's the name? What was the name of your PD? What's the name of
Cohen Wilson?
Exactly. So it's a PD in time and in orientation sports.
The Cohen Wilson is a kind of more biologically driven model of our neurons. In this case, it's more kind of higher level point of view. But yes, the idea is that our vision is mainly very powerful visual information structure. And so having something that models and processes this way is good because it's a powerful way to extract what is visually meaningful.
To come here. So basically, you are willing to cheat on the image, providing we can still see nicely and right.
Yeah, we're framed here because
maybe cheating is not right.
No, exactly. I would say no, but yes, it's a good point.
Yeah,
that
it's not image processing what you're doing.
We leave the idea of being tempted about the fact being colorimetrically precise. That is kind of it takes you wherever you don't know where it takes you. And so if you give up with this idea of being precise colorimetrically, you gain a lot in terms of experience.
Thank you.
So, any more questions? No? Okay, so. Since you're already here, Is this the pointer? This is pointer, forward, and backward. Okay, I will see opposite way around. Yeah, then what should we say?
You can. Okay.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. So, last but not least speaker of the last but not least section of the conference, Adrian Muntean is talking about colloidal transport in locally periodic evolving porous media. Look around clogging. So
thank you,
please.
Matteo, for the introduction. Thank you, the organizers, for inviting me to come here to this very nice event. Thank you for the people which came here and presented so nice talks. I made a lot of notes for myself, a lot of homework. I feel bad to be the last one here. So just before going home, I had the impression that we said all we had to say, right? I heard what I wanted to hear. Now I want to go home. And also I feel a bit put in the corner after having such a nice talk about restoring movies and things like that. And I'm going to speak about horror. But one thing which I like is that you said yourself also that even when you restore things, maybe you don't want to be very, very precise. That there are some level of not being precise which are acceptable to move on, right? And it's exactly what I mean. If people speak about corrosion and description of what happens in materials, either very old or you can destroy them, or very big, you can't have the pretension of being very, very precise. You can't. You simply cannot, for various reasons. So instead of telling you what is in here with my talk, let me tell you what I want you to tell now. I have some sort of two stories. One is about concrete carbonation. My love since the year 2000, I started working on it because my PhD advisor told me, so you should work on concrete carbonation. It's a good problem. And since then, I'm living out of it, more or less. But this is a macroscopic picture. And the second part is, okay, macroscopic is macroscopic, but maybe what happens if I'm looking inside the material, I'm looking around and I describe things? Can I get some extra information? Right, so it is not necessarily connected to carbonation, but it could be. Okay, so, and of course, I have a much, much bigger list of things which I've not done in these 20 years, and maybe take me much more time to do it. And I work with an army of people to work on these problems, and we are still not done. But let me tell you, yeah, okay, so I'm sorry. So these are my bad pictures, right? So there are all corrosion pictures. This. You can all tell, okay, this must be corrosion from the motorway, sulfates, NOx, whatever. This looks like maybe chloride corrosion from stuff which comes from bad waters. I did my thesis on this, on sure pipes, which is really sulfate corrosion, not remarkable, but on those pipes. And I'm Romanian myself. In Romania, we have never worked on these things because they would say, well, we're going to replace the big pipe in big street in Bucharest if it is needed. When is this needed? We are going to see, right? In Germany, the situation was different. They want to, if you want to change it to one pipe in Frankfurt and Main, that street, I'm going to do it. They look, okay, when did we build those pipes? That year, so then we change everything. And of course, there was this commercial business. Okay, it costs us if we change. Can we wait a bit, or should we do it now? That was the motivation from the 2000s, which I had to work on my project. And I was convinced as a mathematician. I was also hoping to get some mathematics connected to that. But after this workshop, I changed to heritage, historical heritage monuments, and maybe bronze, not necessarily sewer pipes, because similar problems appear, and somehow there is a different level of urgency in solving, say, restoring a movie, or restoring a painting or a bronze plate. But mathematically, situations can be described in a similar fashion. And this is the picture, the carbonation picture. I will be talking about it a bit later. This is connected very much to Mauricio's talk and also to the other carbonation talks we had before. So there are many people working on the problems. Some of the references have been mentioned by Chadam Norkoleva. They work on carbonation on peak stones, I mean geochemistry. There is, of course, Roberto and many people. This is an old slide of mine because there's more names of the people here which are working on. So this group from Siena working on that, but there were people in Firenze working on similar problems. And we in Bremen, who were in Bremen at the time, and my Japanese collaborators, And somehow we convinced even numerical analysis to say, okay, these guys, they have no lifetime behavior of durability materials. So if there are models, we can say that the models are correct. Can we build discretization scheme such that the large time asymptotics is correctly captured? Turned out for them to be an interesting problem. For me, as a PD modeler problem, it's less of a problem. It's Giovanni's problem to solve it, or it's Matteo's problem to solve it, right? But it seems that even if you know what is the large time behavior, it's not always clear that you can get it numerically. Without cheating, of course. Yes, we talked about carbonation of concrete. This is carbonation, and this is concrete. Yes, this is more or less the case of the Portland cement, and this is also what you see here. So you have a block of concrete exposed. This is a picture coming from an accelerated carbonation setup. You have a chamber, you put, say, 100 times more, and a huge amount of percentage of CO2 in the box to accelerate, such that instead of waiting 10 years to see within 2 weeks, right? So this is the, and of course, you see a sharp front. And this was a PhD student in Hamburg doing that. And then he sends an email to Adrian at one point from this. Of course, you stay away from the corner, right? We saw in one of the talks, maybe you, that the corner situations are different. So I need to pay attention to the corner. So we have here. So then we basically had a model, one-dimensional model with three boundaries. I think that it's clear, tracing it this front. That was of course, without looking.
Pink is a decision.
Sorry?
It cannot be pink.
It is pink. Depends on your pH indicator. That one gave pink. Please help me. Who is expert in pH indicators? Can it be pink? Of course it can be pink. Exactly, phenolphthalein. Thank you. That was the indicator. Is phenolphthalein. Thank you. It doesn't have to be pink. So this means not yet attacked by CO2. This means fully penetrated by CO2. So high pH, low pH. Okay, but this is a macroscopic picture. They don't care what you see here with the effects or bigger stones. Okay. My interest is more or less in what happens behind those problems. Tutti, I don't know, it's a Swedish guy, already saw, I mean, in the 80s, and maybe the idea came even earlier than that, motivated by quickly modeling this field like a two-phase Stefan problem, that the expected behavior on large time, the so-called similarity solution, looks like that. It looks like that, which was enough for him to do fitting. So why should I describe all the modeling there, carbonation, things penetrate, how should they react? If at the end, I only need one fitting parameter to do that, right? To trace the square root of time. But I didn't like this because he was just thinking about it. I wanted to see, can I make this rigorous? At least in this case. And this brings me to one of the results I was proud at the time about. So if you only look at the concrete carbonation, and if you say the concrete is calcium hydroxide and I have a lot of it, why should I model it? I have a lot of it. I'm only looking to CO2, the guy who penetrates the wall, and I have two of those. One will go to the air, one goes to the water. The one to the air is fast. So I only model these two types of CO2. So there's a PD behind it with a free boundary. One in the pink zone and another PD set in the colorless zone. And we could prove rigorously these bounds for the large time behavior. So it's more than a large time behavior. A large time is what mathematically what happens with t goes to infinity. But this is much, much richer. It gives you the intermediate scales. It gives you also the speed of what is the expected order from the speed. And I didn't call them constants because I heard, I guess, from Paula a comment at some point, how can they be constants? Mathematically, what matters in this context is that they are independent on time and independent on the solution of respective PDs. But of course, they depend on material, they depend on a number of things. And I would love to say I know who they are. I don't know. I only know that they exist, right? But this, if you see this, then you say, now I can fit. Now I can say the speed is sometimes like alpha, okay, so alpha times the square root of time and fit for alpha for a certain material. Okay, is this law valid for natural carbonation? Well, what happens in natural carbonation, even for Portland, you don't have a sharp line, sharp front. You have maybe a thin zone, but thin zones are fine. You can take the free boundary, the interface in the middle of the front and trace that one. So maybe it's possible to do something. If the concrete is smarter, it has much more constituents which are able to react with CO2, then you can't do that, because then it becomes a bulk reaction, and the meaning of the free boundary is not so clear what it means free boundary. So is a moving boundary formulation applicable for natural carbonation? The answer is depends on what sort of material you have. So in general, probably not. Okay, but mathematically, okay, I see this free moving boundary macroscopically. So it moves. But what happens microscopically? Are there no smaller free boundaries microscopically which somehow contribute to this macro motion? So I was thinking, what is behind this form? If I would be a small CO2 molecule sitting at the level of the pores. And this brings me to the second part of it. Right? So let's see. Okay. Do I need to put them there? I don't know. So now this is this concrete here. This is my representation of the concrete. Now it's an abstract, right? But you could change the meaning as you want. In this context, gray means, say, stone or calcium hydroxide, and white means air. You would say, how can these materials stick together? For a mathematician, it does. If you don't want to believe it, change the meaning of the colors, place yourself in 3D, and then you can still do it, right? So it's a matter how you interpret the picture. Don't get stick to that because it's not so important. What is important in this picture is to say, well, there is some variability in the domain. You see, so even if they all look the same on this wall, depending where you look, here or there, situation is slightly different. The local situation is slightly different. What I'm going to present today, I assume I know what happens. You, mathematics, or from the point of view of engineering, you would call it, I know the distributions of the pores, not only how many small pores, how many big pores are, but also how they are placed. I know a lot if I say I know this. And I want to average. Or what to average. So it means I want to define a model around the same model around each of these domains, and I would like to average. Now this comes me back to the connection to the talk before with the level of how do I look to the picture. I call them cheating, but basically not cheating, but somehow erasing, coming forward. If I go back in the other room or maybe outside the building and look here, I see maybe white, right? If I'm coming closer, I can see that I can distinguish colors. This is what I mean by averaging, homogenization. It's a way of looking. If I'm looking far enough, all looks gray or something. This is one representation. But of course, you see a periodic grid and some balls around. But maybe this can disappear, right? Some parts could disappear. And it doesn't have to be even everything present there. I could have defects from this picture. And this brings me to the proper of our indam folder, right? Where the designer had a nice rectangle with a lot of nicely arranged balls, and then decided to remove some lines and randomly remove some spots, right? This could also be a presentation of my material. It's a funny material, but it's possible, right? Depends how you want to do it. So this is the microstructure. So always I assume something on the microstructure, or the engineer gives me at least one realization of how things look like. Or as Mario was saying, you give me an army of realizations, so then I have more options, and then I ask, how do I handle the stochastic geometry of the problem? But I don't do that. Someone gives me the reality, and now I make a Gedanken experiment, a thought experiment. My thought experiment is the following. Now it doesn't have to do with carbonation, but I just want to let particles enter in there. You just take shuffle lots of particles. How many? Continuum many. So many particles. And I let them go and do something and deposit on each of the balls. Right? And you should imagine if this particle deposits, what could happen. I don't know if you can still see from the back of the room. These are my particles coming, they deposit. So the balls grow, and I assume that your water ball, you grow into, right? I'm making my life simple. But at some point, the neighboring balls, if they are too close, they're going to touch. So it means mathematically, it means, okay, they touch. Physically, it means it's local clogging. So it will be have some dramatic effects later on. Roberto, in his talk, he said that porosities could degenerate at some point. And he was saying that degenerate because of the transport equation. The transport had some sort of moments when it was degenerating. Microscopically, the porosity is a macroscopic object. This is the microscopic object. Microscopically, degeneration happens because these balls which grow, they do touch. In 2D, touching is dramatic, right? Because I can't cross it anymore if they touch. In 3D, touching in one point is harmless. And you can also see from the PV point of view that degeneration point not matter. If they would degenerate on stranger manifolds, that would be something more hard. So clogging. So, yes, so okay, I didn't tell you, of course, let me go back. I call a typical distance between two balls in a periodic setup epsilon and omega naught. I have some notation, that doesn't matter. But what it matters is that as the time changes, this picture changes. This picture changes with the time. Some balls, they typically grow, right? So in that picture where the balls are growing, I have the diffusion of, I call them monomers, you can call them, but I have a population of monomers who like to build dimers, trimers, it doesn't matter. They do things. They like each other. If they are too big, they deposit. Right. So once they deposit in such a way on the surface, and then they grow. Then I'm computing the mass on the surface. And then this is a law for how the radius grows. All of this is, I would say, it's a sort of exercise. This is a 2D, the law changes in 3D. You provide boundary conditions and initial conditions and so on. But what you want to do, you want to let epsilon go to 0. Epsilon goes to 0 is that you want to try to average. Why I'm doing all of this? Because I would like to get a macroscopic equation, and I would like to understand where the microstructure, these growing balls, and I expect them to enter in any transport coefficient, in porosities, in everything. So I'm not going to bother you with how these things grow. You do your job, and that's what you get. The structures matter. The structure of the object matter. So this, I would say, is what do these monomers now macroscopically. Initially, I had this equation, a diffusion part and the so-called Smoluchowski interaction, some sort of reaction. Now, if you look to the resulting object, I get the same structure. This coefficient changed a little bit, more or less. And this is totally new. And the rest didn't change the boundary condition. So, okay, this is the first observation. But in order to compute this guy, the so-called effective diffusion coefficient, you see, I have it here in some form, explicit form. I see that I have to have information on the porosity of the domain. Porosity is very simple. If you look at one cell, one periodic cell, and you remove the area of the disk, this is your local porosity. So if you know the R, you have your phi of R. This is not an issue. But of course, you need to know the R. If you know the R, then you know this. These guys are so-called cell problems. These are some local problems, which you do not know them before. but you can, the asymptotic theory gives you, where you can estimate how the geometry, how the local geometry changes on time. Changes between, yes, during the, on time if you want, because time is implicit there. So, okay. So it's a, so basically in this, it's a very coupled system, right? You get an equation for the radius. Also, you get it. You had it before. You basically have it. So the model is very coupled, but the good news is that if I decide that my microstructure is a ball parameterized by a certain radius, then I can compute the effect of the microstructure into the transport coefficient. If I would like to have instead of ball, have triangles or something else, they would touch this value correspondingly. It is important if you think of the wind passing through a material, the constant oriented for the ball doesn't matter, but maybe the microstructures can hinder locally stuff. So it really matters what we put here as geometry. So that's what I wanted to say. This diffusion coefficient has two components, the porosity and the rest. The engineering world calls the rest tortuosity. What is the tortuosity? Is that concept which nobody tells me what it is. They tell you, well, you can't really measure it, but it exists. Sometimes they tell you it's a number, but in fact it's a tensor, right? So if you assume something on some regularity, some arrangement on the microstructure, you can compute it. If you deviate from that, then you don't have access to this information. So if you go away in the stochastic business, in the stochastic homogenization, you can redo everything, but you die more or less here, because you need to make sure that what you put here is not only a well-posed problem, it's also computable and makes sense. So this is the part which, okay. So, yes. That I want to skip. So now, I told you about the balls. So, but in fact, you need to, if you see this equation, this means that this is time, this is space, and these are the balls, right? So now the balls I'm talking here, the distribution of balls, go back, please. I prescribe it. This is exactly the geometry which I know beforehand. This is the beginning of the simulation. This is my initial radius for the balls. The balls are going to grow this way. You see, I took them on purpose here with, this will be clogging very soon. This will be clogging very soon. And I let those monomers come in and look what they succeed to do. Some sort of major clog zone here and a major clog zone there. And some path is going to happen here, right? This is what basically is happening here. This is the result of the simulation. This is the initial data. Now, okay, this is one of a typical realization. If you have a box 0, 1, 0, 1, and you choose on your ball, this is the so-called W function, cell function. Looks like this, just to indicate. And this is a kind of picture you saw it also in the Nicolopoulos talk. This is just a map of the effective diffusivity. It tells you, look, the effective diffusivity shows you that there are some parts where you are not going to pass through. And these parts which are not going to pass through change in time and in space, depending on what was your underlying microstructure. This is a macro object, doesn't see it. Of course, we know because we cooked it this way. We know that there is a porosity function inside. What was it? It was a porosity function in front of the inside of this diffusivity. So we expect that what we put in here will affect what we see here, right? So it's not strange. We know it. You get typical plots. I don't want to bother you with that. There is some published stuff on this. Okay, what are the open things? Because I told you what you can do very quickly. But the pores, I call them locally periodic, because they are not balls. from each point. I mean, it's not it's like a chessboard. So that's slightly changes. And maybe with some defects, because you may remove some of them. I told you that you can pass the limit. Yes, you can, but it's difficult if they are really growing. You need to grow very, very slow, first of all. Second of all, even if they grow slow, you can do this formally. This formal asymptotic, it's not rigorously. But what you can do, you can prove rigorously what you obtain is a good model. That you can do. You still have to justify that the way you got there is the right way. Justify the upscaling procedure, but to do that, I didn't do that. You need to really understand the mathematics of the original problem, which is how to say, not a moving boundary problem, but it's really an ugly one because we have in more places balls growing, and it's very difficult, for instance, to fix the boundaries when all the balls are growing in different ways. So it's, I don't know, it's a technical thing. I don't know how to play without fixing the boundaries. But I see connections, for instance, with these my monomers entering the porous media. You were mentioning again, Roberto, about the old stuff done on consolidants when you put the polymers there. Polymers have geometric structure. The role of the polymers of Roberto was not to destroy things. It was mostly to give mechanical structure here to improve the robustness of the material. So that's possible. To imagine this is a representation of an ugly moving polymer in a something which you can compute. Or okay. The other connection which I see is with I think it was this particulate matter attacking the what was it? It was I have the name of on the last slide. Paola thermoscope. When you had these particles in musea entering in all paintings, all tapestries on so they are destroying things. Yeah. So if you want to see how they do it, you really need to get the level of a particle entering the tissue and then have a way to reach it. Then is maybe one way to quantify a bigger effect on a bigger painting or a bigger wall. And I'm stopping here. I'm sorry for.
So it's time for a few questions in the audience, maybe, or from home.
Just a curiosity, because I never asked to Adrian about numerical simulations.
Yes.
I don't know how do you the simulations and how costly they are. Because usually when you do general simulations of some areas with more details are much costly. So I don't know that.
So it's a good point. Mathematically, what happens? Mathematically means this is the porous domain. At any point, if I put a finger on the wall, I should be able to zoom in and solve a local PD on a moving time domain. But we don't do that. We say that I have 100 such possible points where I can find a. So this is the first reduction. I'm not going into many points. I'm just decided a priori. We do it in 10 or 100, right? So this is important. Now, how you solve it? It's finite differences, finite elements. The only thing is you have a moving boundary, so you would better be able to track the motion of the moving boundary, but it's an elliptic problem with the moving boundary, so not such a complicated thing. I think Christos treats them differently. PDEs with finite differences and more care and level sets for the moving boundaries, but this is an option. Okay. The most critical thing is that we need to decide maybe in an a priori way where you want to zoom in.
Yes.
So that you have,
Otherwise, the cost
it's too much.
Too much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Although nowadays with polarization technique, what is too much?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Do we have more questions or comments? Well, if not, let's thank Adrian. And the speakers as well. Yeah, I think that the organizers want to say something.
maybe Michela also is join us.
Michela, please activate your video.
Okay. So, on behalf of all the organizers, we are here, and Michela is connecting online. We would like to thank all the speakers present. Okay. Okay. So, on behalf of the organizers, we are here. Michela she is online, but we would like to thank all the speakers in presence and online, all the chair, in particular Giovanni Naldi, who made the question to everybody. And we would like to thank also Nicole and Julia, our very, very special assistant, let's say so, but they were very helpful for us. We would like to thank Indam for the organization and funding this conference. For the second time, it was very difficult to organize it in this double way, you see, but I hope that we made a sort of good tentative for the first time after this long period in which we were all at home or also in our office. So I hope that all the conference have been useful for people that are not mathematicians, but and also for us when we had the occasion to listen to people from different backgrounds, and this was the main scope of our meeting. So to meet a different kind of exercise in this area that is very, very important, as you have listened yesterday at the round table. And also I would like to thank the speakers at the round table, and also Elena Bonetti that she found a small little of time, of her precious time to come here, but she was really, really happy. She told me yesterday evening to have been here. So I don't know if we have to say something more. We hope to meet you again, maybe at the third edition of MAC. I don't know if in Rome or some other place, and maybe in Sardinia, as Margherita was suggesting, maybe. And Michela, you are.
I would like just to add a big thank to you three, because it was really a pleasure to work with you. It was really a nice period. And I'm pretty sure you already said it, but a thank to all the participants, because the workshop is made by you. So really thank you, because it was really enjoyable and very, very nice.
Okay, thank you, Michela. And you know, we have recorded all the talks. And I think in a few days we will send you a message with an indication if you would like to see again the talks, or send the links to other colleagues that maybe cannot attend.
If you search on Google,
yes, but now we put
yesterday.
No, yesterday, but I didn't say anything yesterday.
It was almost a secret.
Yes, it was a secret. So,
the last,
please.
I thank everybody. It was a pleasure to organize the event with Michela, Cecilia, and Margherita. Really happy to work with them. And finally, just I will send a message to all the participants if they wish to contribute to the volume, last period volume. We will be very happy. So thanks again.
Okay. Okay. This is it.